How do we record? Well, it's recording right now. It's already started. Say hi.
Hi.
Hi, everybody. So Mr. Ridgway here. We're moving on to the Civil War, and we're going to be getting to that here pretty soon. What we're going to be looking at today are some of the kind of negotiations, acts, compromises, rebellions, things like that that are going to lead us to the Civil War. So, sound good?
I can't.
Okay. Do you want to move the slides on for me? So you just click this button right there, the left one. Oh, try again. Click it. Click it. Good job. So for our warm-up today, what you're going to do is I want you to open up that reflections document that we've been working on. And I'd like you to, again, make sure before you do anything else that the topic that we worked on in class, that you've turned that, the one that we did last class, I mean, before you took your test, that you've turned that into a paragraph. Once you've done that, well, next here is your actual warm-up question. So we're going to take the years 1491 to 1750. So that's the year before Columbus, all the way up to the French and Indian War. If you could pick one theme to represent that time period, what would it be? And write an answer and give one event as an example. Probably the best thing that you can do here is look at the titles of our lessons from Unit 1 and help, to help you with ideas that you could come up with for that. And then also, okay, what I recommend is that you try to answer this question like it's the first paragraph of a test topic, okay? What I'd like you to do when you're done then is I'd like you to paste your writing into this Padlet right here so that I can give you feedback. And so here's what this Padlet looks like. Again, just copy paste your answer.
Is that the Padlet?
Yeah, that's called Padlet.
Oh, it has a bunch of circles?
It does.
Why?
Yes. It's for people to write on like this. Yeah. So go ahead and post your answer there on Padlet, and that way I can give you feedback. So, I know, there are soldiers there, aren't there? First of all, our main mini lesson today is going to be looking at the various negotiations between the North and the South and what is going to cause them. And so, really, as you can see here, we're kind of mashing up a lot of years in this lesson. But what we're doing, more than anything else, is I kind of put all the compromises, things like that, together in one lesson, and then I'll kind of try to update you on events that are going on in the United States as you kind of go along, and you kind of get the picture about how things are flowing. And so it kind of gives you, even though we're kind of rewinding in time here, so to speak, it gives you a little bit of a clearer picture. So conflict on the horizon, slavery's expansion, and compromise. All right, so here's our essential questions. So we're going to be dealing with a couple of very difficult things in this lesson. And the first of one is, where do you think power in the United States resides? Is it in the states or the federal government? You're going to see there's some very, very nasty debates that happen about this at this time. And then also, is compromise between two sides always possible? Can two sides always come to some kind of a middle ground, or are there things that you can't compromise on? Again, no right answers to these questions. So, you want to move on to the next slide? You can click it. Perfect. So,
a map right there and right there.
Oh, I'm so glad that you know those are maps. Two maps.
Wow.
The first thing that we need to talk about, the first compromise that is made, besides the Constitution, of course, yes, and we talked about the 3/5 compromise, is the Northwest Ordinance of 1787. So the Northwest Ordinance, what it did, again, this was passed way back when during the Articles of Confederation. The point of the AOC, the point of the Northwest Ordinance, rather, is that it created that method by which future states, specifically the Midwest, they could join the Union. So, for example, like
and the letters.
So that's showing the amount of free states and slave states.
Which America?
So we live here in Indiana, right here, and so we can see that there were 8 free states and 9 slave states in 1800. The big point about the Northwest Ordinance, guys, is that it explicitly, in the Northwest Ordinance, even though it's passed during the Articles of Confederation, it says that there can be no slavery in those territories. Okay, and again, you can see there on the bottom right-hand map, Wisconsin, Michigan.
I don't think your hand on it.
Let me just point. So, anyways, there you go. So, again, Northwest Ordinance is in play, moves us on then to the Missouri Compromise. Okay? The Missouri Compromise is the first, again, kind of like major deal that happens outside of the Northwest Ordinance. Okay, so Missouri applies to be a slave state in 1819. And there's a bunch of very, very nasty fighting that happens about this.
Fighting.
Why?
Why?
Well, people couldn't decide on how other people should be treated.
Why?
Oh, there's just a lot of disagreement. So there was something called the Talmadge Amendment that was proposed, and this was an amendment, it didn't actually happen, that said that eventually kind of the idea is that with the Missouri Compromise, that if you became a state, is that you could apply, you could start off as a slave state, but then you would have to gradually emancipate your slaves. That plan goes away, and we find that Henry Clay is the one who comes up with this compromise, the Missouri Compromise, and here's what it says. Okay, Maine comes in as a free state. It gets cut off from Massachusetts and becomes its own state. Missouri comes in as a slave state. But then what's really, really notable about the Missouri Compromise is that it creates this magical 36-degree 30 line. It folds up. And in any state that is north of this line, you can kind of see it down here, okay? It kind of cuts through, again, kind of the middle of the United States. Any land north of that had to be free, okay? We have a name for this line nowadays. We call it the Mason-Dixon line. But again, notice in 1821, as soon as this compromise is signed, the balancing that is there between slave and free states, 12 and 12, okay? So again, something to keep in mind of is how many numbers we have. Also notice that if I was doing math here correctly, 1787 to 1820 is like 33 years. So it's a while before there's a compromise on that. Which then brings us to the Compromise of 1850. So only 30 years now. The time seems to be shrinking a little bit. What causes this one? Well, California applies to be a slave state in 1849, and this causes a huge amount of debate. We have states threatening to secede. We have, senators, House of Representatives getting very upset. Violence. And what we get then is something called the Compromise of 1850, which once again is done by Henry Clay, Daniel Webster, and then also a new guy on the scene whose name is Stephen Douglas. Okay, now
Who's
Stephen Douglas. We'll see him here in a second. So what's in this one? Well, the South gets a new fugitive slave law, and basically what it said was that anyone, including people in the North, had an obligation to return basically fugitive slaves back to the South. Not only that, okay, it also obligated them, if they were suspected of being a runaway slave, that they were also obligated to then check that person, and then also if they were escaped or run away, then to also send them back down south. Needless to say, the North, who is not a fan of slavery at this time for reasons that we'll get into after this mini lesson, this is not popular with them at all. They basically just ignore this new fugitive slave law. In exchange for that, California gets admitted as a free state. Okay, so it actually switches. And then the slave trade gets abolished. By the time that we get to 1850, though, because we've added Texas at this point, it balances slave and free states out again at 1313. Okay? So that finally then brings us to the Kansas-Nebraska Act. Okay? The Kansas-Nebraska Act is kind of complicated, but it makes a little bit more sense once you start to kind of dive into the pieces. So Stephen Douglas, there he is. I put one too many S's on his name. That's okay. That's him right there.
Oh.
Yep.
Is he a bad guy?
Is he a bad guy? No. People aren't necessarily just bad, buddy. Bad or good. He was
like a bad person and good.
You think he looks like bad and good? Maybe. Sometimes people are just complicated, you know? Sometimes we're both. It's messy. So what is this king?
A boy.
Yes, Stephen A. Douglas was a boy. Yes, Stephen Douglas was a boy. He was an up-and-coming, a little bit of background on him, Democrat from the state of Illinois. Okay, so he is, again, a Democrat, which again at this time is becoming more and more associated with the South. And what Stephen Douglas wants for Illinois, more than anything, is he really...
6,
You're doing so well with your counting.
9, 10, 11, 12,
Good.
13,
14.
15, 16,
Yep.
17,
Good job.
18, 19,
19. And then
20.
good job.
Got more.
There are always more. Yeah. Can Daddy keep talking? Is that okay?
I can't all out.
Okay. Do you want to go play with that?
Yes, how about you?
Okay. Well, I have to finish talking. Can I go ahead and finish talking? I'm
Mommy.
almost done. You've done a really good job.
I'll do something else on the floor.
Oh, okay. I'm almost done. You've done a great job.
I'll
So
take something out.
okay.
To read.
Okay. So what Stephen Douglas wants more than anything is he wants the Continental Railroad, a route to go through Chicago, Illinois. Okay, and because of that, if you want to, it is about you. Go ahead and check it out. Because if he wants a transcontinental railroad to go through, it's going to have to go through Kansas and Nebraska and those territories. Those were considered at this time to be territories for Native Americans. And what it does is it, gets rid of the territory for them, which in of itself is a mess. But then they have to figure out, okay, well, if you want this land to be open for the Transcontinental Railroad, that means also people are going to have to settle it, right? Or they're going to want to. And then the question becomes, how are you going to decide who gets to settle Kansas and Nebraska? Because if we go back and we look at this line back here, this Mason-Dixon line, it's very clear that both of those states would be northern free states that could never have slavery, and so it would throw off the numbers. So Douglas proposes and gets it passed, this Kansas-Nebraska Act. Okay, and here's what it does. The Missouri Compromise is repealed. Okay, it's just gone. That Mason-Dixon line has just disappeared. So any territory now, no matter if it's north, south, east, north and south at this point, can be open to slavery. Okay, and here's how then, how does a state decide? Well, Douglas comes up with this new methodology, and that is popular sovereignty. It's the idea of letting the people be sovereign, meaning you let the people be in charge of whether, the people in that state, they get to decide whether or not they, have slavery in that particular territory and eventually that state. This sounds like a great theory and principle. Like, oh, it's democratic, like let the people decide. Well, it's a disaster. It basically turns into the purge is kind of what it turns into. And the reason why is because everybody then rushes to Kansas and Nebraska. We have, in many cases, a free government in one town claiming that they're in charge of all of Kansas, and then, miles down the road, you have a slave government that is also claiming that it's in charge of Kansas. And so we get something called Bleeding Kansas out of this, and that is where just literally hundreds of, and thousands of individuals die in violence from these events. That all being said, okay, one big other thing you need to know with the Kansas-Nebraska Act is that this is where the Republican Party is born. And we'll talk more about why they get born out of this event, okay? But it has to do with this idea of, again, any territory in the North being open now to slavery because of this act. Other flashpoints you should know, Uncle Tom's Cabin, okay, which is hated by the South because it kind of portrayed Southern plantation life unflatteringly, at least for that time. The Dred Scott decision, which we'll get into here in a second. John Brown's raid, which we'll also get into a second. And then finally, the thing that is going to cause the South to secede is going to be the election of Abraham Lincoln. And we'll get into more about Lincoln's election and stuff here in a minute. So that is when the South is, that is the last straw for them. So we'll do this exit ticket. Okay, you can just do this on your notes or probably sticky notes. It says sticky notes in here, but we'll probably just have you do it on your notes. 3 things you learned, 2 questions that you have, and then I'd like you to respond to that question. Although North and South could compromise at first, was the Civil War inevitable? Why or why not? Does compromise only work so far? Okay. So then we have some other activities. These ones are pretty self-explanatory. I'll give you a brief rundown on them. There's some other events and rebellions that I'd like you to look at the causes and effects of. There's a graphic organizer here that I'd like you to do. Okay. And here's the 3. The Dred Scott decision, John Brown's raid, and then the Nat Turner rebellion. Okay. Once you've done that, you're going to finish up the lesson by looking at the beliefs of the Free Soil and eventually the Republican Party. There's a short selection that I'd like you to read over here. Okay, and this comes from Abraham Lincoln in 1858. You might be very surprised by what you read about what Lincoln believed at that time. And then also this is the statement from the Republican Party platform from 1860. There's some questions on the bottom of this paper. The reading, I highly recommend you do them. It will help you. But here are some of the answers. Again, go ahead and pause it back there if you need to, so I'll spoil it. Here's what the broad shift of the parties are. So when we get the Free Soil Party, which kind of starts off in the 1840s, 1850s, and by the late 1850s, it's really fading. The Free Soil Party is the party of NIMBY, which is not in my backyard. They are opposed to slavery. They're Northerners. And the reason why is because, not because they think slavery is wrong inherently, they do not want to compete with the labor of slavery. And also they are, in many cases, just straight up racist. So they're not necessarily opposed to it, they're just opposed to it near them. Okay, and that's why they have the slogan, free labor, free soil, free men. Okay, the Republican Party is in many cases the exact same thing as the Free Soil Party, with one key difference, and that is they oppose the expansion of slavery because they also believe it's inherently wrong, but then also and this is true I guess of the Free Soil Party as well, is that they also fear the power that many of these slave states have because of that advantage. Again, the big difference for the Republican Party is that they believe that slavery is a morally inherent wrong and it should be gotten rid of. Okay, and you can kind of see the evolution there from the Free Soil Party to the Republican Party. So there you go. I look forward to seeing you guys in your next lesson. Booker, do you want to say bye?
Bye.
Bye. Bye, everybody.
I don't